Welcome, everybody. My name is David Hart. I'm the director of the Mitchell Center. It's great to have you here. We're actually on the very last talk of the semester because next week we have actually a bunch of students here that are taking the class, and we reserve this hour to kind of hang out together because we're always in the midst of the class, so we don't really get to check in as much as we would like. So I'm looking forward to that next week. And actually, if you want to be seen and see all the cool people around, come to the party the week after. Starts at 3 o'clock, so don't miss that. By the way, this is these sustainability talks. They're always kind of in the works, and so we've got a really cool lineup. It's not all every title is down, but pretty much almost all the speakers are lined up. I was just on the phone a little bit ago about some loose ends on April 9th or something. But you can go onto the website and at least get a glimpse of this, and it's going to be a real cool mix of speakers. Everybody, gosh, I can't even do it off the top of my head, but people who work in foundations and work on climate adaptation up in with First Nations, kind of looking at it like using science, but on the ground impacts for communities. That to cool science and everything in between. So, and yeah, this talk, we're co-sponsoring a talk that'll be in this room later this week on Thursday. The time will come up in a sec. But this is a really amazing speaker, Daniel Pauly, who will be talking about some really interesting issues at the intersection between marine science and marine policy, and it's co-sponsored by a lot of good groups on campus, including the Mitchell Center. So, today we're lucky to have Sonja Birthisel here to talk about the research she's been doing. But if you watch this go by, you also should know you're going to want to rush up and get an autograph or something. There's a great article in yesterday's Portland Press Herald by Mary Poles about her and her work, Sonja's work, and it's wonderfully written. I forget something in catchy title, something about she'll help you meet the beetles. But since I was trained in entomology, I know she really means carabid beetles, not the beetles from Liverpool. So there's a lot. I learned some things in this cool story that I didn't know, among others that Sonja went to Luther College, which is where a really close friend of mine went when I was out in California doing graduate work. I'll have to talk to you about that sometime. But she got back to Maine soon enough and did her master's degree in ecology and environmental science, and some of that's on seed predators, beetles that eat the seeds of weeds. So that's what a lot of this story talked about in part. After she did her master's, she went and worked with AmeriCorps up in both Penobscot and Aroostook, or Piscataquis counties, where it looks like she had some really amazing experiences that only underscored her interest in education. She is currently doing research that she'll talk about today with her advisor, Eric Gallant, that was funded in part by a grant from the Mitchell Center. And so I'm looking forward to hearing the latest news about that. But the final thing is the whole discussion about weeds is apparently contentious. There are different views of what a weed is. The final sentence of the article by Mary Poles is where Sonja says, a weed is any plant that is not where you want it to be, to which I would just offer this sort of rejoinder from Ralph Waldo Emerson. A weed is a plant whose virtues have not yet been discovered. So take it away, Sonja.
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you all for being here. Let me see if I can get out of this.
Remember this?
Aha!
Well done.
I'm a quick student, they tell me. All right. Welcome. My name is Sonja Birthisel. I'm a PhD student in agricultural science in the EES program and the School of Food and Agriculture. So weeds are a big problem. They cause an average 8% yield loss globally, which makes them a multi-billion-dollar problem. And they are especially problematic for organic farmers and those who do not use herbicide to manage their weed issues. And Maine is lucky to be, oh, this came out a little bit funny. This should say 517. Maine is home to 517 organic farmers on last count. And this is a growing population in the state of Maine. We've had a long and proud tradition of organic farming, starting with back to the landers like Elliot Coleman, continuing on with folks like Mark Guzzi, who you might know from the Orono Farmers Market. He's a proud University of Maine Sustainable Ag Program alum. And part of this increase that we are seeing in recent years in organic farming in Maine is due to an increasing number of young farmers, beginning farmers. Maine is one of the few states in the nation where the average age of the farmer is going down. Between 2007 and 2012, we've seen about a 40% increase in the number of farmers less than 34 years old in Maine. To contrast this with national trends, there's been just a 1.5 percentage point increase in farmers in that demographic nationwide. And many of these young farmers are coming from the city. I need to look at my notes to make sure I get this number right for you. But according to a 2011 National Young Farmer Coalition survey of 1,000 young and beginning farmers, 78% did not grow up on a farm. Farmers in general, and organic farmers in particular, use many different strategies to manage weeds on their farms. This Wordle shows a snapshot of some of those strategies. This was made in answer to the question, how do you manage weeds? And its responses from 380 organic farmers in Maine to that question. The larger words are correspond to entries that were given by multiple farmers. So, we know that weeds are an issue, and there are many tactics to manage them. A few years back, my advisor, Eric, became interested in this question of how do farmers decide how to manage their weeds? To address this, he conducted 23 interviews with organic farmers in northern New England and found that the top 2 factors that impacted weed management decisions were the type and timing of the weed and what worked in the past. So for many farmers, trial and error is really important to their learning process. We also conducted interviews with experts or scientists and compared the mental models of farmers versus scientists to see whether there were similarities and differences between what these groups of people know about weed management and how they thought about it. And there were many similarities, but we also identified a couple of knowledge gaps among farmers, things that scientists know but that are not intuitive and you might not necessarily learn by trial and error. So those are useful things that we're carrying on into the future. And this background led me to the question that's really the nexus of this Mitchell Center funded project I'm here to talk to you about today, and that's, can we do some of this learning about how to use the variety of different weed management techniques that exist in a virtual setting? Can we speed up that trial and error process and make it a little bit less labor intensive and costly? So, the idea for the project kind of looks like this. I'm taking existing data about weeds, their biology, and how to control them using organic techniques, using this in some simulation modeling, and then using that to underpin a decision aid. The first step I took in launching into this project was to start looking at some existing decision aids. What kinds of tools are out there that farmers use to make decisions? And there are some great ones, but many prioritize content over user interface. Awesome content, sometimes a little bit of a clunky user interface that to me as an up-and-coming sort of analog of a young farmer myself, I was struck one time watching my young nephew play Angry Birds. Well, why is it that our decision aids are not utilizing some of these engagement principles? The technology exists for people to make digital content that's so fun and engaging that my 3-year-old nephew who can't read loves to play with it. Could we take some of those elements and integrate them into the way we make decision aids? So I decided early on in this project that I wanted some folks with a new media background to be part of it and to bring their skill set into this. So, my outline for what I'd like to talk to you about today, I would like to show you the tool I've developed. It's called Weeducator. Weed and educator stuck together, you see there. Then I'd like to walk you through some survey data. I had agriculture students here at UMaine beta test Weeducator, and I want to show you what they thought of it. And then finally, I'd like to show you some economic analyses that are still developing and are not part of the Weeducator tool, but are kind of the next direction for tools like this that I'd be interested in working on. So, I'm gonna show you Weeducator via slides today. I didn't have time to troubleshoot exactly how to bring it up on this computer. But we can try to open it up on my laptop afterward if you want to play around with it yourself. When I was starting this project, I did get the input of a couple of focus groups. This is a focus group I did with some established farmers, and they really steered me in the direction of trying to make a tool that was most relevant to that beginning farmer population that really has a steep learning curve as they're getting into farming. And they also gave me, this focus group, some really great suggestions for things they wished they'd known when they started farming that I wanted to incorporate into my design. All right, the learning objectives of Weeducator are threefold. I would like users to learn a little bit about weed life cycles. When do weeds germinate? How long do they live? When do they set their seed? There are kind of different categories. I also want them to learn some best practices for tools and strategies, and learn a little bit about the weed seed bank, which is the store of weed seeds that live underground and create your future weed problems. Weed seed banks can be big or they can be small, and your management can really impact that. So, picture this spinning around a central signpost, and you are now inside Weeducator. Weeducator consists of 3 modules in its current iteration. One for life cycles, a tool shed, and a management simulator. And if you want to learn a little bit more, you can click credits. I'm going to take you first into the life cycles field. So life cycles is kind of a virtual guidebook for different common kinds of weeds. Here we've got winter annual weeds, summer annual weeds, biennials, stationary perennials, and creeping perennials. And you could hover your mouse over any of these weeds and see its name. You select the one that you want. Say I wanted to select wild carrot. I'd click on that and I zoom into my guidebook. I can see my drawing of wild carrot. I can zoom in a little bit further. And this is showing me some interesting things about wild carrot that might be good for me to know. So wild carrot emerges in April through early June, will flower in July through August, and it's a biennial weed. So it germinates one spring, lives and grows vegetatively that first summer, overwinters. Usually biennials have tap roots that allow them to overwinter. And then in its second year, it will flower, set seed, and die. In comparison to other kinds of weeds, it has a medium amount of seed production, and its reproduction is by seed. It doesn't reproduce through other means, as some weed species do. I can also zoom into any of the features in my guidebook, so say I wanted a closer look at those pictures, I could zoom on in and then zoom on out, which I'll no doubt do. I'm going to head back to my central signpost. There we are. All right. There's a quick snapshot of the life cycles section. The tool shed is really trying to show some best management practices. Here's the outside of the tool shed. If you step inside, you'll see there are icons representing a number of common weed management strategies or practices. Mulching, this propane tank represents stale seed bedding, cover cropping, cultivation, hand weeding, and then in each of the modules there's a section for references. So if you want further reading or to know where I got the information, that's there. Say I wanted to learn more about cover crops, I could click on my cover crop seeds, and there's an animated infographic that would tell me a little bit about that, focusing on some of the things established farmers tell me, I really wish I knew this when I started out, and some things that I as a weed scientist think are really important. For example, the number one thing to remember if you are growing a cover crop, a crop that you grow just to cover your soil and be competitive against weeds, is that timing is key. You should really try to kill your cover crop before weeds that are coming up underneath it can set seed. If I head back out to the tool shed, I could learn about something else. The tool shed is a combination of infographics, like what you just saw, and videos. So I'm not going to play a video for you today in the interest of time, but here's just a screenshot of kind of what the art and feel of that looks like. So they're narrated and have subtitles, and this is showing that if you're creating a stale seed bed with flaming, one advantage to using a propane torch to kill weeds is that you can do this after your crop seeds have been planted and weeds are starting to emerge, but before the crop emerges, and that heat is just going to kill the weeds that are on the soil surface, kind of clearing the way for your crop. All right. Heading back out to our central signpost, I now want to take you to the most game-like element of Weeducator, and that is the management sim. So here's what that looks like, and I'm going to walk you through it piece by piece because there's quite a bit going on here. If I had my mouse, there would be hover over text that would tell you what each of these things are. This is the seeds in the top inch of soil, seeds in the deeper couple inches of soil below that. This line of weeds is immature weeds, baby weeds that are not going to seed yet. And then the line behind are mature weeds, weeds that are flowering and setting seed. So over the course of a season, from April through May, June, July, and on to November, here's a simulation of what I might expect a population of summer annual weeds to be doing. And this interface is underpinned with a discrete time simulation model that's on a weekly time step. You can, oh yes, this bar over here, very important. This is the amount of seed rain that is happening. So new weed seeds that are falling from plants into the seed bank or into the soil. Looking up above my field at my clipboard, this is where, as a user, I could make a management plan. I could iteratively play around with different practices and see what this did to see the number of seeds in my seed bank and number of immature weeds and number of mature weeds in my simulation and the amount of seed rain. So say I took my starting seed bank and dialed it all the way down to a pretty low starting seed bank. Right off the bat, you see that there are fewer weed seeds in the soil, as you'd expect, and that the total amount of seed rain, seeds coming down to the soil surface in the summer and fall, just decreased, just by making it so there are fewer weed seeds there to start with. All right, let's go back to kind of a medium level of seed bank and start adding some management tactics. If I till the soil once at the end of May, and then cultivate once with sweeps, say, here's what that does to my simulation. My seed rain bar has decreased from if I did nothing, and the point at which you start getting mature weeds in your field is delayed a bit. What happens if I then add several more cultivation events? Cultivation is like pulling a tool through the soil to kill weeds. Whoa! Adding 4 more cultivation events really controlled my weed population pretty effectively. And this top layer of the seed bank, I want to fix this graphic so it's a little bit clearer to see, but the number of weed seeds in that top layer decrease as they are germinating out of the seed bank and being killed. So this is a strategy that might be expected to deplete our weed seed bank. All right, well, what if I don't want to cultivate and I would instead prefer to lay down a 3-inch layer of hay mulch? I could go into my little yellow arrow and select hay mulch of a certain depth, and here's what my simulation says for that. Obviously, there's it's not a perfect simulation because you might get different results based on weather, based on the crop that you're growing, based on your soil type. But this is all parameterized based on our own research and the literature, and so I think as a heuristic tool, it gives you a decent idea of what's going on biologically. All right, so hopefully that's given you a decent flavor of some of the functionality that's part of the current version of Weeducator. It is a work in progress. There are some bugs, but I'm excited by the progress so far. Next up, I want to show you some survey data. So I recruited participants from 2 of our PSE classes here on campus. This is the PSE is Plant, Soil, and Environmental Sciences. So I got 19 participants. Several of them, just so you know, are from a course that I'm teaching, and so it's possible that those participants could have their opinion of this thing colored by what they think of me as a teacher already. Wanted to make a note of that. And with these participants, we did anonymous pre- and post-assessments. So I would have them fill out a pre-survey that asks them about their year in school and their major, and then gauges their knowledge of weed ecology and management. Allow them to play around with Weeducator at their own time for about half an hour. And then at the end, they'd fill out a post-assessment with matching questions to gauge their knowledge, and allow them an opportunity to provide some feedback about what they thought worked well, what they thought could have been better, whether they found any bugs I should really know about, that kind of thing. So this is data from pre-assessment scores versus post-assessment scores out of a total of 18 possible points. So students did increase their scores based on exposure to Weeducator. And I also asked them to rank their confidence in their answers on the pre and post assessments, and their confidence score also increased from pre-test to post-test. So they learned and gained confidence in what they knew. And these are statistically significant differences. In the feedback section, 2 of the questions I asked are them to rank true or false. Was Weeducator helpful, and was Weeducator fun to use? And most students did feel that the answer to both of these questions was true. It was helpful and it was fun to use. No students answered false, and a couple chose not to answer for reasons that are mysterious. I also asked students to rank their preference for how they would like to learn the kind of information that was presented in Weeducator. By textbook, in a lecture, viewing YouTube videos, via activities in lab or lecture, or in a tool like Weeducator, with a ranking of 1 being high. Weeducator was tied with activities in class or lecture as the most preferred way to learn this kind of information, and actually beat out significantly even YouTube, which I thought was exciting. These are, again, a pretty small sample size, but I think exciting preliminary data that shows that at least some students really value this kind of tool and think that it's a great way that they like to engage in learning. All right, finally today I want to take you on a little tour of some of the economic work that's been part of this Weeducator project. Originally, I had hoped to include a whole nother module that was about weed control economics in the design of the tool. I also had a whole module about seed banks and one about seed predation, and I had to continually scale back because I tend to aim too high. But we did make some exciting progress putting dollar signs on different weed management tactics that I'd like to show you now. And this was done in collaboration with Dr. Erin Hoshide. So first off, before we can start assigning dollar values to weed management tactics, I do want to acknowledge that scale is really important. Whether you have a small farm or a large farm makes a difference in what kind of equipment you have and what might be feasible for you. And so, as our own assumptions, when we started these analyses, we decided to use whether or not you had a tractor as a tipping point between small farms and large farms, because there are many farms in Maine, especially organic farms, that don't have a tractor, and the ways in which they farm are a little bit different, therefore. Once you have a tractor, you also need to consider that there are a lot more fixed costs that go into your farming operation. All right, so we've built an Excel-based calculator, which I will not take you through at great depth, but I do want to just point out that what it allows you to do is select the amount of a total area of farm that you have that you'd like to put under different weed management practices and how many times you'd like to do those practices. And then you, based on fixed costs and variable costs of the different equipment and the inputs that go into that, what a dollar value for your weed management operations might be. You can also play around with and tweak things like how much are you paying your staff? What is the cost of propane? Those kinds of input parameters. And like I said, my Excel calculator is not linked to Weeducator yet, but I do want to use just some screenshots of Weeducator as a way to illustrate some of the examples I'm going to show you. So let's go back to my example of a weed management system where I've tilled once in the spring and then I want to cultivate. We can calculate the cost for a single cultivation event, assuming that you're farming on a small scale and doing this with a hand hoe, a collinear hoe. We estimated that that one cultivation cost might run you $195 an acre. If you then switch and say, okay, well, what if I do more cultivation events? What if I go back to that situation where I'm doing 5 cultivation events, and this is really doing a great job of controlling my seed rain? How much does that cost? Again, for our small farm scenario, that costs $973 an acre, according to our calculations. And this This is almost 5 times as much as a single operation, which makes sense at a small scale because your biggest expenditure is labor. If in the large scale scenario where you're doing this with more mechanization, the fixed costs of your operation come into play to a more substantial degree. So my current iteration of the spreadsheet does not have places for what crop you're growing and how much money you might get for it. But a colleague, Brian Brown, did a really neat field experiment in which he's compared basically the strategy I just showed you, which has very minimal cultivation-based control, with a zero seed rain approach, he calls it, where you cultivate many times over the course of the season in order to really keep your weeds at a minimum. And he's found that economically, putting more money into an intensive weed management approach like this was worth it for onions. More research on different types of crops would be awesome to see whether that holds true for more different, in more scenarios. But this can be worth it, according to Brian's data. One thing that I'm excited about with my calculator is that we can kind of look at trade-offs and break-even points. So let's assume that hay is $2.33 per square bale, and I'm farming again at my small scale scenario. Let's say I mulch with hay, leave it on all season. That ends up being much more expensive than my cultivation-based strategy. But what would I need to do to my hay cost to get it down so it's breaking even with the cultivation-based strategy? It could be that there are great reasons to mulch. For example, mulching builds soil quality and can help with water retention in the soil. So that can be a really great strategy if you want to minimize drought risk later in the season. There are lots of benefits to mulching, and it's something I might want to do. How low would I need to get the cost of my mulch in order to break even with that cheaper cultivation-based strategy? Using my calculator, we can determine that we need hay to be at $1.29 a square bale. So this is just one example of how it can be kind of fun to play around with this. All right, so conclusions for today are that my Weeducator tool, I think, is a promising proof of concept for how gamifying decision aid tools and education can be pretty fun and useful. Students like it, and I have demonstrated that it can be effective as a teaching tool. And there are hidden costs to weed management, which I think is a really exciting area in which I'd like to spend more time doing future study and outreach. If you want to check out my Weeducator tool, you can find that at my website. It's skbirthisel.weebly.com/outreach. And I would like to thank very much the Mitchell Center for Sustainability Solutions for funding this research. My collaborators, Peter Rimkunis and Jack Sullivan, are the new media artists whose collaboration was really integral to making my current iteration of Weeducator kind of fun and user-friendly. Erin Hoshide worked on the economic analyses, and these other fine people are excellent as well. So thank you. And thank you for being here. Yes.
Can you put the previous slide back up with the link?
You bet. Go for it. Yep. So this is a desktop application, and if you go to this website, you can download it for Windows or Mac.
Cool.
Yep.
I shall.
And please feel free to email me what you think about it if you've got suggestions for improvement or if you find bugs.
I will, because I can break anything.
Oh, good. Sue.
So Sonja, I was wondering what level of knowledge you think a user would have to really benefit from the weed. Like, could it be
Yeah.
high school, useful school? Or?
I think it could be. The students that I've had test it so far have been really at a range of skill levels, from first-year students who are not in the sustainable ag major up through graduate students in our program. And I haven't fully sliced and diced the data yet because it's pretty hot off the presses, but it seemed as though users at multiple skill levels were finding something that they appreciated.
Great visualization.
Oh, thank you.
I was wondering, have you thought about like giving this to actual farmers in the future, and how are you going to like research about the markets and how much they're willing to pay if you're going to like charge them?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't have as my intention charging people to use this. I'd say it's a purely pro bono project, but I would love to get feedback from more people, including a beginning farmer audience. And one of the focus groups I did earlier on in the project was with a group of agriculture students from another school that are all sort of graduating and starting new farms now. And so a lot of them gave me their email and said, send it to me when it's done. I'll probably send this to them soon. I haven't planned my next steps, but certainly I would like to include showing this to more beginning farmers among them. Yeah, thanks for the question. Yes?
Yeah, the management simulator I think is really neat and has a lot of potential. I was wondering how you measure the relative effectiveness of each one of those management techniques.
Mm-hmm.
What are your sources? Is it coming from like empirical analyses, lab, theoretical?
Yeah, it's mostly empirical analyses. So we've got a lot of data that our lab has generated about the effectiveness of different kinds of tools and different mulches or strategies, and then there's also quite a lot in the literature. So it's a combination of data from our lab and from the literature. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. The other piece was how can you learn more about that? If you go into the references section of the management simulator, it's got a list of the citations that were consulted. There is some data that isn't published that we just have on our lab computers, and I'd be happy to show that to you as well if you're keen.
Sure. One quick follow-up.
Go for it.
What's the level of uncertainty, like if you're trying to use this with a different drug? Because I know there's a few, at least I think there are a few different drugs that was made. How does it transfer to other locations?
That's a great question. This is, I would say that this is at a heuristic, coarse enough level that I wouldn't expect that it's not pigeonholed by growing zone. There are more considerations that introduce more variability than growing zone that are not accounted for, that's sort of the tip of the iceberg. And how I've tried to deal with uncertainty is a complicated question. I've done an awful lot of thinking about it and justified to myself what I did, but I'm not going to tell you with a straight face that it's perfect or it's the only thing that could be done. I've thought about trying to incorporate stochasticity into the modeling, and that didn't get done in order to sort of produce this prototype, but it's something I'd like to explore more in the future. Yeah.
It would be interesting as you get more feedback from out in the wide world, to get in touch with people or have them tell you, okay, I'm up in a Aroostook and this is my feedback, or I'm down in southern Maine, and that'll give you a little bit more insight into how that is going to affect the issue.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for that suggestion.
I'm in Penobscot, so
Mm-hmm.
probably right on. We'll
Yeah.
see. I'm anxious to play.
Okay, great. A lot of the parameters in the life cycles unit, where it's showing you what times of year different weeds germinate and set seed. Much of that is parameterized based on the literature, and I tried to find literature values that were generated as close to Maine as possible, but there's certainly some uncertainty there as well, because a weed that's growing in Kentucky might behave differently than a weed growing in Maine. Yes?
It looks like a really interesting way, like for community garden and other groups,
Mhm.
to be able to find some information virtually. What I'm curious is, I wonder if people could develop a similar thing about the other kind of pests, namely unwanted insects and bugs and things like that.
It could be, and it could be that such things exist and I simply don't know about them. So if anyone else has knowledge on that topic, feel free to shout it out.
I think I was going to ask kind of a question, maybe a level above Jules'
Mhm.
question, which is, so what, I mean, cooperative extension's been around for more than 100
Mhm.
years. I mean, obviously, their approach to outreach hasn't always looked like this, but you
Mhm.
could imagine that a lot of people have been thinking about tools that could be shared in this way.
Mm-hmm.
What do people, how active an area of research is that, whether it's about weeds or about pests, insects,
Mm-hmm.
and how well developed, I think the questions that have been brought up about, like, so you can tailor this really tightly, right, to this place, this kind of farmer, this kind of community, or you could build
Mhm.
something that was very general, and then somebody'd have to figure out how to customize it or something.
Mhm.
Well, is that an active field? How much did you try to learn about the state of the art, kind of at that big level, or is that something where every state cooperative extension kind of has somebody who does this, or is it actually some are, I don't know, out on the forefront and others aren't there yet for good reasons or history?
That's an awesome question, and I have not really been able to satisfactorily figure it out myself. I know there are some extension folks in the room who might have good suggestions or thoughts on that. I do know that within weed management specifically, the last time someone made a weed management computer game that I've been able to find was 1991. And it was like coded in Fortran, and things have evolved since then. And so I am looking forward to sharing this at the Weed Science meeting, and I do hope that it will inspire people to, think creatively about what is possible in terms of outreach. But it's also possible and likely that there are many wonderful interactive tools that I have not had the pleasure of discovering yet.
David, there is a national organization, it's extension that is trying to get state level extension to kind of aggregate content in certain areas to try to avoid duplication or be more efficient. So there's loads of videos and fact sheets and all of that. So there's a lot of content out there everywhere.
Right.
One of the motivations for this though is that we're competing for people's eyeballs and brain attention. And if they're already engaged, they don't need this. They can go look up our papers directly if they want to solve their problem. This is to try to get them to start to know what they didn't know they didn't know.
And didn't know that they needed to know.
Yeah.
Any other questions? By the way, Sonja has the program up here. If you guys really want to see
Yeah,
work, come on up at the end. But let's thank her again.